Millionaire farmer meets his ex-girlfriend at a county fair and is shocked to discover he has twin children. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Luke Caldwell inhaled the warm Texas air as he stepped onto the dusty fairgrounds. Despite the noise of carnival rides, clanging metal gates, and auctioneers calling for bids, all he could feel was a tense excitement simmering in his chest. The annual county fair was more than a celebration of ranch life and hardy competition. It was a place where business deals were made, reputations polished, and fortunes solidified. And for Luke, this year's fair held a special purpose. He was here to showcase the prime cattle from his expansive Caldwell Ranch, a legacy he had inherited and turned into one of the most profitable ranching operations in the region. From the outside, everything about Luke spelled success. His broad-brimmed hat, the polished boots caked with just enough dust to show he still worked the land, and the confident tilt of his head indicated he belonged to that elite circle of wealthy ranchers who thrived in the tough climate of West Texas. But beneath the calm exterior, Luke carried a well of complex emotions. This fair had meant something different once. Long ago, back when love felt easy and heartbreak seemed impossible. He stopped for a moment at the entrance gate, letting the swirl of the fair wrap around him. Families bustled past, children giggling with cotton candy stuck to their faces. The air smelled of fried food and sweet hay, blending with the tang of livestock in the warm breeze. Everywhere he looked, bright banners fluttered: rodeo tonight, livestock auction, best apple pie competition. Each sign served as a reminder of the tradition and pride rooted in this place. Luke exhaled slowly and forced himself to focus. He had responsibilities. Before indulging in any nostalgia, he had to confirm that his champion bulls were properly settled in the pens behind the show ring. Moving through the crowd, he tipped his hat politely to neighbors and acquaintances he recognized, people who had seen him grow from the silent, determined teen after his parents passed to the serious young man who expanded the ranch to the millionaire rancher he was today. But as Luke made his way to the livestock arena, something kept tugging at his mind. Memories from years ago, a stolen kiss behind the stables, a promise whispered during a summer dance. Hannah. The name floated unbidden to his consciousness, making him clench his jaw. He hadn't seen her in so long that sometimes he questioned whether the memories were real or just dreams. They'd met here, at this fair, back when he was hardly more than a ranch hand himself. She was a vibrant, spirited woman who fell in love with his determination. He believed in those days that life would be simpler, that the love they shared could conquer everything. They had parted abruptly the day Luke inherited the ranch. His father's sudden passing threw him into decisions he wasn't ready for, and the demands of the property weighed heavily on his heart. Convinced Hannah would never adapt to the unrelenting grind of ranch life, Luke ended their relationship, hoping that by distancing himself he would save them both from a life of arguments, regrets, and disappointment. She deserved more than the lonely existence he believed the ranch demanded. Yet he never truly moved on. At the cattle pens, a group of ranch hands greeted him, tipping their hats with respect. Among them, Clay, Luke's trusted foreman, updated him on the bull's condition and the show schedule. Each word barely registered in Luke's mind. He nodded and made the appropriate comments, but a wave of restlessness seized him. Clay frowned slightly, noticing Luke's unusual distraction. "You all right, boss?" Clay asked, pulling a slip of paper from his front pocket. "Everything's on track for the auction. They're saying you'll take top dollar for these bulls. Folks are eager to see your stock." Luke managed a tight smile. "I'm good, just remembering old times." Clay gave him a curious glance but didn't pry. Instead, he handed Luke the slip of paper, showing final details for the livestock competition. "We'll finish setting up here if you want to walk around, maybe see the rest of the fair. You know, blow off some steam." "Thanks," Luke responded, tipping his hat in gratitude. Without looking back, he walked away, letting the roar of the crowd swallow him again. He had planned to make a quick circuit of the fair, greet a few potential buyers, and then head to the arena to finalize details for the auction. But as he passed by booths brimming with local crafts, fresh honey and towering funnel cakes, an echo of laughter from the past pulled him toward the old fairground area where roping contests and barrel races were held. Luke paused under a large banner that read, "Welcome Ranchers. Live Rodeo tonight." As he scanned the stands, he felt a jolt. His gaze collided with that of a woman standing near a corral. Her hair shone in the midday sun, and she wore a familiar expression of half surprise, half recognition. Hannah. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to quiet. All the noise of the fair, the cattle, the hawkers, the children's laughter, it all faded into a low hum. It had been years. In that moment, Luke was struck by how little had changed in her soft yet resolute features. He recalled every curve of her face, every shimmer in her eyes. But then he noticed something else. Two small, tow-headed boys at her side, each wearing mini cowboy hats perched proudly on their heads. The boys chased each other in playful circles around Hannah's legs. A wave of heat surged up Luke's neck. The twins looked to be around 5 or 6, maybe. Suddenly he saw something hauntingly familiar. The shape of their chins, the same determined angle he saw every morning in the mirror while shaving. He felt his breath catch. Could it be? Hannah's expression flickered with alarm when she noticed Luke staring. She reached out instinctively to gather the boys closer, and for a second her eyes shone with raw emotion, regret, longing, perhaps fear. Then she composed herself, brushing dust off the children's jeans as if it were the only thing occupying her thoughts. Luke tried to clear the tightness in his throat, forcibly telling himself to remain composed. He had walked away from Hannah all those years ago, believing it was the only path that made sense. Yet the pair of identical faces looking up at him challenged everything he thought he knew. The memory of their last encounter flashed before him. She had cried, begging for the chance to try ranch life by his side. He had insisted she deserved an easier life, a more glamorous one. Convinced he was acting for her good, he never told her how it tore him apart inside. Now, seeing these boys with Hannah, an almost dizzying rush of guilt and confusion washed over him. He managed to step forward, one foot in front of the other, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Hannah's hands were shaking as she ushered the children behind her. It felt surreal, like a scene from a dream he had replayed over countless nights. Except this time, it was no fantasy. The look in Hannah's eyes confirmed it. He wasn't imagining things. They were his boys. All around them, the fair continued in a blur of color and sound, carnival games awarding stuffed animals, a band playing lively country tunes, rowdy cheers from the rodeo area. None of it mattered to Luke now. The entire universe had shrunk to just 3 people, Hannah and 2 small, wide-eyed boys wearing hats too big for their heads. He was close enough now to notice that the freckles across Hannah's nose were the same as before, that one of the boys had her gentle smile. The other's serious expression mirrored Luke's own guarded nature. He opened his mouth, but no words formed. Instead, Hannah spoke first, her voice trembling. "Luke, you weren't supposed to see them." He felt a pang so fierce that for a moment he thought he couldn't stand. "They're mine." It wasn't a question. His tone was low, almost reverent, like he was pronouncing the only truth that mattered. Hannah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Luke's knees nearly buckled as the meaning of that one word sank in. He watched the boys, who peered curiously around their mother. They had no idea the storm swirling between their parents. For 6 years, he had missed their first words, their first steps, every birthday. That realization cut deeper than any heartbreak he'd ever known. And yet, in the very next moment, a stirring of fierce protectiveness rose within him. These were his sons. He wanted to hold them, to laugh with them, to promise them the world and never let them feel the sting of absence again. But Hannah's posture reminded him that trust was something he would have to earn, if it could even be earned at all. He tentatively reached out as if to pat one of the boys on the head, but Hannah stepped protectively in front, her eyes full of warning and heartbreak. The little boy with the serious face frowned at Luke, as though meeting a stranger who was, at the same time, oddly familiar. "Hannah," Luke began, but his voice caught in his throat. All the questions tumbled inside him. Why hadn't she told him? Did she think he wouldn't care? Or was she still angry he'd left her behind all those years ago? She answered before he had the chance to speak further. "It doesn't matter," Hannah murmured, glancing away. "You made your choice. I did what I had to do for them." From the distance, Luke's foreman Clay called out, "Boss, the auction's about to start." But Clay's voice sounded distant, unimportant. Luke stayed motionless, taking in the weight of her words. She was right. He had made a choice, and in trying to spare her from a life he thought she couldn't handle, he'd taken from himself and from her one of the greatest experiences life could offer. Now, faced with the living proof of his choices, Luke could only whisper one thing. "Hannah, I'm so sorry." She looked up, tears shining in her eyes, jaw set with the determination of a woman who'd had to fight her battles alone. A dozen emotions flickered across her face: hurt, anger, longing, maybe even a small flicker of hope. But the sudden tension in her shoulders said that forgiveness wouldn't come easily. At their feet, the two young boys squirmed, fiddling with their hats, sensing the invisible line drawn between the grown-ups. Luke wanted to sweep them into his arms, but he knew crossing that line right now might shatter the fragile moment. He could almost hear their hearts beating, feel the weight of their unspoken questions. Who is this man, and why does he look at us like he knows us? In the background, the crackle of the loudspeakers announced the auction was about to begin. People bustled by, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their midst. The dusty wind kicked up, swirling around them in little eddies, as if the entire fair held its breath to see what would happen next. Luke swallowed hard, wishing he could pause time. Instead, he mustered the quiet strength that had made him successful in the ranching world, directing it now to the most important challenge of his life, reuniting with the woman he'd never stopped loving and meeting the sons he never knew existed. The distant crackle of the loudspeaker urged the crowd to the auction arena, but Luke's feet felt locked in place. Every fiber of his being trembled with the realization that the two boys standing before him, restless, curious, identical in so many ways, were his blood. A storm of guilt, awe, and longing brewed inside him, rendering the outside world hazy and unimportant. He forced himself to speak, though each word threatened to collapse under the pressure of 1,000 questions. "Hannah, please, let me talk to you." He gestured slightly, stepping aside so they wouldn't be in the path of the bustling fairgoers. Hannah nodded, eyes glistening. She guided the twins away from the corridor of foot traffic, leading them behind a small ring of pony rides. A mechanical whir filled the air every time a child circled by on a wooden pony, as carefree as childhood promised to be. Luke's gaze kept darting to the boys, noticing a swirl of details: a bandage on one child's knee, the faint freckles on the other's cheek, the same narrow shape of their noses that matched his mother's side of the family. He swallowed again, fighting the urge to break down on the spot. "This is Sawyer," Hannah said quietly, nodding to the more serious-looking boy who clutched the brim of his too-big cowboy hat. "And this is Shane." The second twin stared at Luke with wide eyes, his lips pressed together in a thoughtful pout. Luke took off his own hat, a gesture of respect he usually reserved for prayers and solemn greetings. He squatted to meet them at eye level, voice gentle. "Hello, Sawyer. Hello, Shane." His throat tightened with unshed tears. I'm Luke." The boys blinked, exchanging uncertain glances before turning to their mother. Hannah didn't fill in the blanks right away. She stood there, arms crossed over her chest, as though bracing herself for the next blow. It dawned on Luke that the heartbreak he felt was nothing compared to what Hannah must have endured all these years. He cleared his throat. I guess you know me as Mr. Luke, he said, struggling for the right words. I'm an old friend of your mom's. It sounded hollow, calling himself an old friend when he had fathered these children, but he couldn't lay claim to a title he hadn't earned in their lives. Sawyer gave a little nod, still suspicious. Shane's eyes flickered with momentary interest, then he took a half-step forward. Are you a cowboy? The boy asked, eyeing Luke's boots and hat. Luke managed a soft chuckle. Yes, sir, I work on a ranch, a big ranch. His simple statement seemed to impress them, though Sawyer remained tight-lipped. The seriousness in that small face tugged at Luke's chest with an almost physical pain. He wanted to explain everything, but there was no time, and no simple way to unravel the tangled events that had shaped their lives. In the tense silence, the fair music and the hum of tractor engines droned on. Luke could sense that Hannah's patience was stretched to a breaking point. How many times had she imagined this encounter? How many nights had she lain awake, wondering if Luke would ever show up? If he would demand to be part of the children's lives or vanish again, leaving her to pick up the pieces? Before he could speak again, Hannah's jaw tightened, and she guided the twins a step back. Look, I don't want a scene in the middle of the fair. Her voice wavered despite her best efforts to sound firm. We can't stand here going around in circles. Luke stood, placing his hat back on. I know, and I'm sorry. More sorry than you can imagine. His eyes flicked between her and the boys. I had no idea. She let out a breath that wavered dangerously. But I tried to tell you, Luke. I wrote letters when I suspected I was pregnant. You never answered. Then, when Sawyer and Shane were born, I tried again. I sent word through people I thought you'd listen to. Nothing. Her voice rose in barely controlled emotion. After a while, I convinced myself that you just didn't care. Luke shook his head, thunderstruck. I never got those letters, Hannah. I swear. He wondered if extended family had intervened, or if ranch hands had simply not passed on her messages. He recognized with deep regret that in the chaos of taking over the ranch, he may have let entire sacks of mail go unanswered, delegating or ignoring them out of grief and overwhelm. His stomach twisted, imagining unopened envelopes holding the news that would have changed his entire future. I would have come if I'd known. Sawyer and Shane watched the exchange, sensing the gravity but not understanding. Hannah wiped a trembling hand across her cheek, tears threatening to spill, then turned toward the kids. Go stand over by the cotton candy stall, she said softly, pointing just a few steps away. I need a minute with Mr. Luke. The twins obeyed, though Sawyer's gaze darted back protectively. Hannah waited until they were out of direct earshot, then squared her shoulders. Luke, I've worked 2 jobs for years, scraping by to make ends meet. I didn't want to rely on your money. I wanted to raise them on my own terms, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been hard. Her eyes brimmed with pent-up frustration. They might not say it, but they've asked about a father. I've never lied to them about who you are, but I also never painted you as a villain. I didn't want them growing up bitter. I said you were out there ranching, but I couldn't give them more because I didn't know more. And now, her voice cracked, now you show up, and they see you, and everything changes. Luke's chest felt so tight that breathing became a conscious effort. You were never out of my heart, Hannah, he whispered, fighting tears he never allowed himself to shed. I messed up. I didn't think you'd ever want the ranch life. I thought leaving was better for you. I was an idiot. She let out a ragged breath, standing there in the swirling dust. It's not about me anymore, Luke. It's about Sawyer and Shane. If you're going to suddenly appear in their lives, you need to be sure. They deserve to know if you plan to be there tomorrow and the next day and every day after, not just when it's convenient." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I want to be part of their lives. I do." But the enormity of that promise clutched at him like a vice. Owning a successful ranch had come at the cost of endless hours of labor and intense focus. Where did fatherhood fit into that schedule? How would he make up for lost time? Still, the choice was clear. He had to try, or he would lose them forever. In that moment, a commotion rose from the loudspeakers near the auction ring. His foreman's voice cut through the air. "Luke Caldwell, you're needed in the show barn, pronto!" It was a direct, urgent call that usually meant a crisis involving livestock or some other problem that required the ranch owner's immediate attention. Hannah lifted her chin, a look of resignation flickering across her face. "Your life is calling you," she murmured with a hint of bitterness. "It always does." Luke's first instinct was to ignore it, to stay by Hannah's side and figure this out, no matter the cost. But obligations pulled at him. This auction was crucial, not just for prestige but also for the ranch finances, supporting dozens of employees and families. If he abandoned it, many people would suffer consequences. The problem now was that if he didn't go, everything he'd built might unravel. If he did go, he risked reinforcing Hannah's fear that he'd run at the slightest inconvenience. He wrestled with the dilemma for a moment, glancing from the auction ring to Hannah and the kids. Then he met Hannah's eyes, voice low. "Stay until I'm done. Please, let me come find you after the auction. I swear, I won't just walk away." She folded her arms, hesitating. Finally, she nodded. "We'll be at the petting zoo area. It's Shane's favorite. You'll find us there." "But Luke—" She paused, lowering her voice. "Don't disappoint them." Luke nodded, tipping his hat again before throwing a last, longing look at the twins. They appeared so small yet carried the Caldwell determination in their stance. With a churning heart, he turned and rushed toward the show barn, every step feeling like he was being pulled in two directions at once. As he ran, he couldn't help but wonder if fate was giving him a second chance, or a final test. He'd built his life around the ranch, letting it overshadow every personal ambition or dream. But now, the stakes had never been higher, and the feelings surging in his heart told him that no matter what crisis waited at the barn, nothing was more important than the family he'd found at this fair. Two little boys whose gaze told him they needed a father, and the woman he'd never stopped loving. In the show barn, the air hummed with the noise of anxious buyers, the bellowing of cattle, and the sharp commands of ranch hands trying to keep the animals calm. Dust motes swirled in the warm afternoon light that streamed through narrow windows near the rafters. Luke arrived breathless, half his mind still with Hannah and the twins. He spotted Clay near a row of stables, arguing with one of the veterinarians. The foreman's normally unflappable face was etched with worry. Sensing Luke's approach, Clay motioned him over, his tone urgent. "Boss, it's Diablo," Clay said, gripping the brim of his hat. "He's not looking good. The vet thinks it might be a twisted stomach or some other complication. They're telling us it's risky to put him on display for the auction." Luke's heart gave a lurch. Diablo was one of his prize bulls, easily the biggest draw of this year's fair. Potential buyers had traveled from other states just to see Diablo's lineage and muscle tone. The bull's success in competitions had boosted Caldwell Ranch's reputation. Losing that star from the auction ring could cost Luke's operation hundreds of thousands of dollars, not to mention the blow to their standing in the ranching community. Stepping up to the stall, he found Diablo pacing restlessly, froth gathering at the edges of the bull's muzzle. The animal was sweating, and the distinctive ring in Diablo's nose glistened under the barn lights. Luke's stomach twisted in sympathy. He reached a cautious hand to the bull's neck, feeling the trembling muscle beneath the hide. The veterinarian, an older woman with a no-nonsense expression, spoke firmly. "He's in distress, Luke. It might be colic or something more serious. We should get him to a clinic, or at least keep him off stage. Putting him in front of the crowd, parading him around would be reckless. Luke exhaled slowly, his eyes drifting over Diablo's side. He thought about the ranch finances, about how critical this show was for the months ahead. But the bull's well-being came first, always. If Diablo suffered a severe medical issue in front of the entire fair, the fallout would be disastrous for both the animal and the ranch's reputation. "Okay," Luke said, lowering his voice. "Let's move him to a quieter spot. Clay, gather a couple of the hands and carefully load him into the trailer. We'll take him to the nearest large animal vet station. The fairgrounds have an emergency clinic on site, right?" Clay nodded. "Yes, boss, near the main entrance." "Good. Let's get him there." Luke patted Diablo one last time. "And if the doc says he needs extra care, we'll do whatever it takes." The veterinarian gave a brisk nod. "I'll come along and help monitor him. I'll also alert the staff at the clinic. Let them know we're on the way." They set about quietly and calmly leading Diablo out of the stall. It wasn't easy. The bull's agitation made every movement risky. But Clay was experienced, and with 3 ranch hands flanking the bull, they managed to guide him into a specialized trailer hooked to a sturdy ranch truck. Standing by the trailer, Luke felt the weight of eyes upon him. Disappointed buyers and onlookers craned their necks, whispering. He glimpsed a few big ranch owners shaking their heads. Some might interpret this as Caldwell Ranch losing its edge or not being able to handle top-tier animals. Yet Luke's mind was elsewhere. It drifted back to Hannah, Sawyer, and Shane, waiting at the petting zoo. Every second spent here was a second away from them. Clay slapped the truck's side. "We're good to go, boss. Just tell me who's riding along." "I'll go," Luke said instantly. Then he paused, recalling that the entire ranch team had banked on him being there at the auction, presenting their other cattle. A swirl of duties threatened to tangle him again. "On second thought," he corrected, meeting Clay's eyes, "I need you to do it. You know exactly how to handle Diablo in transit, and I need to finalize the rest of the auctions. If his condition gets worse, call me right away. I'll be there in a flash." Clay didn't argue. He knew Luke's presence was crucial for the financial success of the day. With a quick nod, Clay and the vet climbed into the truck and drove off, Diablo's trailer rumbling behind them. Luke looked around, heart hammering. The next portion of the auction was minutes away. At the same time, an entirely different, far more personal future was standing in the fairgrounds not too far from him, wearing small cowboy hats and probably wondering if Luke was going to show up. How could he be in 2 places at once? He rallied himself. The ranch was big business, yes, but being a father was an even bigger calling. He would have to strike a balance right now. Summoning a ranch hand, he quickly gave instructions for the second bull, Tornado, to be shown under the Caldwell Ranch banner. "Tell the bidders I'll be at the stage as soon as I can. Just start the introduction without me if needed." The ranch hand hurried off, wide-eyed with the unusual directive. Luke turned on his heels and navigated the bustling fair pathways once more. Every face seemed to blur by. He passed the funnel cake stand, smelled kettle corn drifting through the air. He weaved around a group of excited teenagers bragging about the rides. His pulse thudded. A small voice in his head whispered, "You're late." They might have left. But he shook off the anxiety and quickened his pace, determined to get to them before that happened. At last, he spotted the archway leading to the petting zoo, a corral with small goats, fluffy sheep, and docile ponies roped off for children to feed and brush. Parents hovered around, snapping photos. In the swirl of activity, it took him a moment to find Hannah and the twins. They stood by a pen of rambunctious baby goats. Hannah had her arms folded on top of the fence, looking absent-mindedly at the animals while Sawyer and Shane tried to tempt the goats with handfuls of pellets. From a distance, Luke watched the boys giggle as the tiny goats clambered on each other to reach the snacks. For a few precious seconds, he let the sight wash over him like a balm. This glimpse of normal life that he'd longed for without ever knowing how much he needed it. He swallowed the tightness in his throat and approached them carefully, as though any sudden move might shatter their fragile reunion. Hannah heard him first. She turned, her gaze wary, but relief flickered in her eyes that he'd actually come back. "You're here," she said simply, as though she'd been bracing for disappointment. Luke removed his hat. "I am. I'm sorry it took a bit longer. One of my bulls, he got sick, but it's handled." He paused. "I promised I'd come." Sawyer and Shane pivoted, each clutching a handful of feed. Shane's expression brightened. "Look, Sawyer, it's the cowboy." Sawyer, more guarded, studied Luke's face. Then he gave the slightest nod, as if acknowledging that Luke had indeed returned, and it made a small but significant difference. Luke smiled softly, stepping closer to the pen. Hannah's voice was low. "What happened with your bull?" "He's on the way to the clinic. My foreman and the vet are taking care of him," Luke explained. "It might cost me a small fortune if he's out of the auction, but that can't be helped. I'd rather lose money than risk his health." She nodded, almost approvingly. "You've changed. Or maybe you're just more open about it now." They fell silent for a moment, the goats bleating in the background. Sawyer and Shane pressed themselves against the fence, letting the animals nibble from their hands. Occasionally, the goats' tiny teeth tickled their palms, earning squeals of surprise. Luke gently rested his arms on the fence next to Hannah's. "I'd like to spend the rest of the day with y'all if that's okay," he ventured, glancing at her. "I know you have questions and so do I, and the boys, well, I just want them to know me, even just a little." Her posture stiffened. "This can't just be a nice day at the fair, Luke. I don't want them building false hope." He bowed his head, shoulders tense. "I understand. That's why I need time, not just today but after. I need to prove to you and to them that I'm not going anywhere." A flicker of emotion crossed her face, torn between caution and a desire to believe him. She inhaled, clearing her throat before speaking quietly. "All right. One day. This day, at least. Let's start there." Relief coursed through him. He turned to the boys who were now trying to coax the littlest goat onto a small hay bale. "Hey, Sawyer! Hey, Shane!" he called softly. "You boys want to see some real ranch horses later?" Shane's eyes lit up. "Real big horses? With those fancy saddles?" Luke nodded. "My friend in the rodeo's got a few. He might let you climb up for a minute, only if your mom says it's okay." He looked at Hannah, who studied him. "They've never been near anything bigger than a pony," she said, voice tinged with apprehension. "Are you sure it's safe?" "I'll be right there with them the whole time," Luke reassured her, letting the sincerity show. "Nothing will happen to them while I'm around." A subtle, unspoken communication passed between them. Hannah hesitated, then gave a small nod, as though acknowledging that he was in earnest. She could see the genuine longing in Luke's eyes, a father determined to make up for the years stolen by misunderstanding and a misguided sense of duty. "Okay, but they'll need helmets," Hannah cautioned, half smiling. Luke grinned, tipping his hat. "Ma'am, you got yourself a deal. Helmets for sure." Sawyer, who had been listening quietly, gave a short, decisive nod. "I want to ride a real horse. I'm big enough." Shane cheered in agreement, spinning around to face them. "Yeah, I do too." Luke laughed softly, a rush of warmth filling his chest. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go see about some horses." The four of them made their way out of the petting zoo area, weaving through the crowd. Luke tried to hide how shaken he was by the overwhelming sense of rightness at having them near. Along the way, Shane trotted beside him, brimming with questions. "Do you live at a ranch house? Is it far away? Do you have dogs? Mommy says ranches have so many animals." Luke answered each query patiently, though beneath his casual tone his emotions roiled. He was discovering how quickly children's hearts could open, and he wondered if they could close just as fast if he failed them. Sawyer stayed close to Hannah, but Luke noticed the boy occasionally throwing curious glances at him. Like a young colt, Sawyer seemed willing to approach but needed time to trust. Within minutes, They arrived at a side corral where a friend of Luke's, Joe Henderson, was tending to a couple of well-trained quarter horses. Joe grinned upon seeing Luke approach with two small children. "I never thought I'd see the day," Joe teased. "Are these ranch hands in training?" Luke's face reddened slightly. "Something like that," he replied, gently guiding Shane forward so Joe could help him up onto a short mounting block. With Hannah at Sawyer's side, the boy watched carefully as Shane placed his small boot in the stirrup. Joe had a calm hand on the horse's bridle to steady it. Luke made sure Shane had a helmet clipped securely. Then, with a burst of excitement, Shane settled into the saddle, eyes wide as the horse shifted its weight beneath him. In that moment, Luke glanced over and saw Hannah's eyes glistening. She'd always dreamed of sharing experiences like this with someone, maybe with him once, but she'd ended up doing everything alone. Now, at least, for these few seconds, Luke was by her side, sharing the simple wonder of their son's first real horse ride. It felt like a fragile but much-needed taste of the family life both had been denied. Shane giggled in awe while the quarter horse took a slow, deliberate step. "Mom! Mom! Look how high I am!" His voice rang clear with uncontainable excitement. Hannah forced a brave smile. "I see you, baby," she called, though her grip on the fence was tight with nerves. Next to her, Sawyer's face showed that same craving for adventure, but tempered by caution. Luke crouched beside him, quietly asking if he wanted a turn. The boy studied Luke's face, seeming to measure if the invitation was genuine, and then gave a firm nod. Soon, both twins were taking turns riding in small circles under Joe's watchful guidance. Their giggles and squeals lit up the corner of the fairgrounds. Luke stepped back to Hannah, who was silently holding a camera phone. "I've got them," Joe assured from the ring, his cowboy drawl soothing and friendly. The horse flicked its ears, docile and well-trained. Hannah exhaled in relief, lowering the phone after snapping a few pictures. "I can't believe this is happening," she murmured. Her tone carried layers of meaning, relief, confusion, perhaps a flicker of hope. "Them. You. Me. Here with you." Luke gently laid a hand on the fence rail. "I can't believe it either. But I don't want this to be just a glimpse of something good. I want it to last." For a long moment they watched the twins. Tears shimmered at the corners of Hannah's eyes, but she brushed them away quickly, summoning the strength that had carried her all these years. "We'll see," she whispered. "We'll see how this day goes. And then, maybe we can talk." Luke nodded, his heart pounding with gratitude and yearning. "That's all I'm asking. A chance." As they watched Sawyer and Shane, the warm Texas sun bathed the corral in golden light, and for a brief, precious moment, everything felt as it should be. But beneath that fragile contentment lay the undeniable knowledge that old wounds wouldn't heal overnight. The day would be full of smiles and new memories, and also the looming question of whether the rancher who had chosen solitude for so long could truly become the father and partner that Hannah and the twins deserved. The afternoon sun blazed steadily, but a bank of ominous clouds lurked on the horizon, unnoticed at first by the busy fairgoers. Luke led Hannah and the boys away from the corral, eager to explore the rest of the fair together. The twin joys of fatherhood and the tingling closeness of Hannah's presence gave him a new kind of energy, one that pulsed under the usual anxiety he felt when business and personal life collided. They strolled past clusters of vendors selling homemade jams, hand-tooled leather belts, and bright carnival trinkets. Sawyer and Shane stared wide-eyed at every booth, exclaiming over cowboy figurines and glass-encased bullwhips. Luke, wanting to keep the day light-hearted for them, pointed out the safe displays, like wooden toys and stuffed armadillos, while avoiding anything that looked too rowdy. Hannah stayed beside him, her expression mingling wariness and tentative peace. Each time her gaze accidentally brushed his, sparks of unresolved tension flashed between them. "Come on," Luke suggested gently. nodding toward a stand that advertised rope tricks for kids. Bet the boys would have fun learning to spin a lasso. Hannah eyed the stand, her lips curving in a gentle smile. You think they're old enough for that? Luke shrugged with a fond grin. Never too early to try. I started learning when I was younger than they are. Then, remembering the unspoken years he had lost, he added quietly, I guess I just want to share a little of ranch life with them, as much as I can, in one day. Hannah's gaze softened. I get it. Sawyer and Shane, hearing the mention of lassos, rushed ahead. Luke made a small gesture, as though to take Hannah's hand, but he stopped himself, uncertain if she was ready for that. Instead, they both followed the twins, who were already gazing at colorful ropes hanging off a wooden rack. A ranch hand performer named Travis, sporting an impressive mustache, welcomed the boys. Howdy, little wranglers, he boomed, tipping his hat with theatrical flair. Who's ready to learn some roping skills? The kids lit up. Even Sawyer's cautious facade cracked a little as he studied the demonstration with intense focus. Shane hopped from foot to foot, brimming with excitement. Hannah watched with a tender worry that Luke recognized as the universal sign of a mother protecting her children's dreams and preparing for the possibility of disappointment. Under Travis's guidance, the boys attempted to twirl the rope overhead. Of course, the loops wobbled, tangling in small knots or slapping down onto the dusty ground. Yet each unsuccessful fling brought a burst of giggles and a determination to try again. After several tries, Sawyer managed a decent spin, and his eyes widened with pride. Shane cheered wildly, as though his brother had roped the moon. Luke crouched, giving Sawyer a congratulatory pat on the shoulder. That's it, bud. You got it. Keep that wrist loose. He looked on with something like awe. Every new moment with these boys felt like an unexpected treasure. He caught Hannah's eyes on him, and for a brief instant, she offered a slight nod, as though granting silent approval of his gentle encouragement. They lingered there until the kids had their fill of ropes and spins. Travis bid them farewell with a jovial tip of his hat, and Sawyer clutched a free miniature lasso, determined to practice at home, wherever that would be. Luke's heart pinched at the thought of them not having a permanent place in his world. As they made their way through the fairgrounds again, Luke noticed the wind had picked up. The temperature dropped subtly. He glanced at the sky, seeing how quickly those distant clouds had rolled in, now heavy and dark. A subtle tension threaded through the fair's festive atmosphere as vendors started securing tablecloths and tying down their awnings. Hannah spotted it too. Looks like we might get rain. I heard a rumor about a chance of storms, Luke murmured, scanning the horizon. Hopefully it'll pass quick, but this is Texas. Weather can turn nasty in a heartbeat. They pressed on, weaving around carnival rides and lines of children waiting for cotton candy. A faint rumble of thunder rolled in the distance. The little group made it to a cluster of demonstration booths, local artisans showcasing carved wooden animals, quilts, and wrought iron designs. The boys stopped at a blacksmith's forge, captivated by the sparks flying as the smith hammered hot metal into horseshoes. Hannah and Luke exchanged amused smiles, letting the twins marvel at the glowing steel. A sudden flash of lightning streaked across the sky, followed by a closer clap of thunder. The lights around the fair flickered briefly. Instantly, the carnival rides shut down as a safety precaution, and an announcement echoed over the speakers. Attention, fair visitors! A storm is approaching. Please move indoors or to sheltered areas until the weather passes. Sawyer pressed closer to Hannah, nervous, while Shane looked excited by the dramatic weather shift. Luke glanced around. People were scurrying, some with jackets pulled over their heads, others huddling under tents. The swirl of wind whipped dust into little spirals at their feet. This way, Luke said, pointing to a sturdy building labeled Livestock Supply Warehouse. We can ride it out there. The building's pretty solid. Won't be as crowded as the main exhibit hall. He guided them across the fairgrounds, boots crunching on gravel. Hannah clutched Sawyer's hand, with Shane galloping ahead until lightning cracked overhead, prompting him to run back to Luke. They hustled under a broad awning, only to be buffeted by a sudden gust that brought sheets of rain. Within seconds, they were soaked. Thunder boomed again, so loud it rattled the metal roof overhead. The group found themselves near the loading docks at the back of the warehouse. A door stood open, revealing rows of tractor supplies and stacked hay bales. No official staff seemed present. Everyone had likely sought safer corners. Luke ushered them inside quickly, slamming the door behind them as the wind howled. Sawyer trembled, pressing himself against Hannah's leg. Shane wiped his dripping hair out of his eyes, trying to be brave. The interior was dimly lit by emergency bulbs. Water dripped off Luke's hat in rivulets. He removed it and gave it a shake, then noticed Hannah shivering in her damp blouse. "You're freezing," he said softly, peeling off his jacket and draping it around her shoulders without waiting for permission. The action felt natural, protective. She stiffened momentarily at the unexpected closeness, but as a chill ran through her, she pulled the jacket tighter around herself, nodding in gratitude. Lightning flashed through the high warehouse windows, illuminating towers of farm equipment in stark silhouettes. The thunder that followed made the twins cringe. Luke laid a gentle hand on Sawyer's back. "It's okay, son. The building is strong. We're safe in here." Sawyer looked up, his brown eyes wide. "You promise?" That single question carried more weight than just the storm. It was a child's plea for reassurance on many levels. Luke's throat felt tight. "I promise," he repeated, voice resolute. Hannah ushered the boys onto a dry patch behind a cluster of stacked crates. She sat down, arms around them both. The thunder boomed again, shaking the walls. The air smelled of wet hay and machine oil. Luke stood watch near the door, occasionally peering outside to gauge how fierce the storm was. After a few minutes, the kids seemed calmer. Shane nudged Sawyer, then looked at Luke. "Do you think the goats are okay? And the horses? And your bull?" Luke managed a small, reassuring smile. "Yes, the animals have shelters, barns, and experienced folks looking after them. Diablo's in a clinic and Clay won't leave his side." He crouched by them, the dim overhead light casting shadows across his face. "We ranchers are used to storms. We plan for them. It's how we keep everyone safe." A flash of lightning revealed Hannah's face, etched with silent thoughts. Slowly she loosened her hold on the boys. "Luke," she said, measuring her words, "I appreciate what you did, coming back for us and braving your own responsibilities. But this is going to be complicated, even more than you realize." Luke glanced at her, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. "I know," he said, his voice low, "but I'd rather face complicated than walk away again." Hannah studied him, the lines around her eyes reflecting equal parts exhaustion and longing. "We have a lot to talk about. The ranch, where we'd live, how we'd handle everything. Sawyer and Shane have never known anything but me, scraping by, renting small places. I don't want them overwhelmed by ranch life, especially not the image I used to have of it in my head, an image you confirmed when you left me behind." Lightning tore across the sky, its brilliance flooding the warehouse with a brief, ghostly glow. Outside, wind-blown rain battered the metal siding with a deafening roar. Luke leaned forward, voice firm despite the cacophony. "I made mistakes, Hannah. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was wrong." She inhaled sharply, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Yes, you were." Sawyer gazed between them, uncertain. Meanwhile, Shane fiddled with a piece of straw he'd picked off the floor, likely too aware of the tense conversation. Luke gently touched Hannah's hand, ignoring the jolt of electricity. This time, not from the storm, but from the raw emotion lingering between them. "Hannah," he murmured, "I can't change the past, but let me show you the ranch as it is now. Let me show you I'm not running away. We can figure it out, together." even if it's messy. Another thunderclap rocked the warehouse, making the twins jump. Hannah's eyes flickered to them, her expression softening. She nodded at last, though her guarded stance didn't falter. One step at a time. For them. Luke squeezed her hand in the dim light. For them, he echoed. The subdued promise felt like a seed of hope planted in the middle of a raging storm. The wind pounded furiously for a while longer, but gradually the thunder rolled further away. The worst of the storm seemed to pass overhead, leaving behind a steady downpour. Luke listened intently, waiting for the wind's howl to fade. Soon, only the rhythmic drum of rain remained, echoing through the cavernous space. Sawyer spoke up, voice tentative. "Is it okay if we leave now?" Luke glanced at Hannah, who handed his jacket back. "Let's see if it's safe. Stay close, kiddos." They rose, stepping gingerly around puddles forming inside. Luke pushed open the door, greeted by a gust of damp air. The fairgrounds beyond were drenched, big puddles reflecting flickers of lightning in the distance. A few lights had shorted out, giving the place a hushed, almost surreal atmosphere. Vendors huddled under tarps, or else deserted their booths altogether. Hannah took in the scene, eyebrows knitting together. What happens now? The fair might shut down if the power's unstable. Luke surveyed the area. Could be. Usually they resume some events once things are secured, but a lot of folks might pack up and go home. They don't want to risk more storms. Should we stay or head back? Hannah asked, gazing toward the main exit gates. The children glanced at each other, then turned hopeful eyes on Luke. What about the rides and the funnel cakes? Shane asked, bouncing on his toes. We didn't get to go on any rides yet. Luke's heart clenched with tenderness. These everyday experiences were brand new to him as a father. Well, he said, let's see if they're letting people on rides again once everything's inspected. If not, I know a place in town where we can still get funnel cakes. The twins whooped in excitement. Hannah gave a small laugh that was almost disbelieving. All right, she relented. If the rides are closed, I guess we can try your funnel cake idea, but I need to get them home soon, Luke. We have a long drive and they're already exhausted. Her subtle emphasis reminded him that even if they spent a sweet evening together, he would soon watch them drive away. Tension crept back into his muscles, but he forced a smile for the kids. We'll make it happen. Let's go. Carefully. They ventured out, picking their way along wet pathways. Even though the storm had settled into a mere drizzle, the air felt charged with a deeper promise. In the flickering lights and the glistening puddles, Luke sensed that today had changed everything. And despite the roar of thunder still fading in the distance, he silently vowed that he would not let this day be just a single bright moment. He intended to stand by Hannah and the twins, ready to weather every storm that lay ahead. Soft rain pattered across the fairgrounds as dusk approached, giving the lingering crowds a chance to catch their breath. A few rides sprang back to life, their blinking lights reflecting off puddles like neon confetti. Luke guided Hannah and the boys down a row of concession stands, each promising fried delicacies and sugary treats. The air smelled of damp sawdust and caramel, punctuated by bursts of laughter from those brave enough to continue enjoying the fair despite the earlier storm. At a half-lit funnel cake booth, Luke insisted on buying 2 plates piled high with powdered sugar. Shane and Sawyer's eyes went wide as though they'd never seen so much delicious chaos in one place. Hannah hung back a bit, half laughing at the sight of the white sugar dusting the children's cheeks when they took their first enthusiastic bites. "This is the best day ever," Shane declared around a mouthful of fried dough. He had a smear of sugar on his chin. Sawyer, always more restrained, just nodded solemnly in agreement, though his grin gave him away. Luke chuckled, stepping alongside Hannah as the boys devoured the funnel cakes. "I'm glad it's going so well for them," he murmured, voice tinged with relief. "I worried they might be scared after the storm." Hannah smiled, though her gaze flicked over to the twins. "Kids are resilient, Luke. They bounce back fast from most things." Then her features hardened ever so slightly. "It's the bigger wounds that leave lasting marks." He exhaled, hearing the unspoken meaning. The children had forgiven the chaos of the storm within minutes, but the scars of Luke's absence and Hannah's struggle didn't heal so quickly. "I know," he said quietly, bracing for the vulnerability of the conversation. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes. I'm not leaving again." Hannah studied him for a moment, as if trying to discern whether his sincerity ran deep. Before she could respond, Sawyer tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, can we go see the Ferris wheel now?" She hesitated, glancing at Luke. The giant Ferris wheel near the center of the fair was lit up again, though most of the other rides were still closed. A cluster of fair employees stood at the base, checking harnesses and mechanical components after the storm. "It's up to your mom," Luke said, carefully stepping back to give her the final say. Hannah looked at the Ferris wheel, a towering circle of colored bulbs still flickering from the recent power cuts. Rain glistened on the metal spokes. She took a breath, remembering how the twins had never ridden anything bigger than a carousel. "All right," she relented, "but we all go together, and if it seems unsafe, we step away." The boys cheered, scattering drops of powdered sugar from their plates. Luke tossed the remaining funnel cake in a trash bin and offered his hand to Shane, who grabbed it eagerly. Sawyer walked in the middle, gripping Hannah's hand, though he glanced up at Luke with guarded curiosity. They made their way to the Ferris wheel's ticket booth. A slightly weary operator wearing a yellow rain poncho greeted them. "4 tickets?" the operator asked, peering at the children. "They'll love the view, if the drizzle doesn't block it." Luke paid without hesitation. The operator led them to a car that rocked gently on the wheel's circular track. It was one of those classic gondolas with a canopy overhead, offering some protection from the drizzle. "Here we go," Luke whispered, helping Shane climb in. Hannah guided Sawyer onto the seat, then slid in next to him, leaving room for Luke on the opposite side. The operator locked the safety bar, gave them a quick check, then stepped away to load the next passengers. A small jolt ran through the gondola as the Ferris wheel lurched forward. The lights on the ride flickered again, still stabilizing after the electrical glitches. Shane let out an excited gasp, while Sawyer stiffened, gripping his mother's arm. Luke gently set his hand on Sawyer's shoulder. "It's okay, kiddo. It's just a little bump." The wheel rose steadily, each metal arm creaking softly. The higher they climbed, the more the fairground lights spread out beneath them, glowing in the dim twilight. Raindrops tapped on the canopy overhead, but inside, the air felt close and intimate. Hannah inhaled sharply when the wheel paused near the top, letting people at the bottom get on. Luke found himself seated so close to her that he could sense the tension in her posture. She was torn, relieved that the twins were happy, but fearful that the ride might shudder, or that the emotional weight of the day might break her resolve. From the corner of his eye, Luke noticed Shane pressing his nose to the edge of the gondola, marveling at how high they were. Sawyer stayed close to Hannah, silent but alert. The boy glanced at Luke occasionally, as though trying to decide if he trusted this man he barely knew. A gentle breeze rocked the gondola. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the clouds, but it seemed the worst of the storm had passed. Far below, the fair glittered in a patchwork of tents, rides, and muddy paths. A hush fell over the family, broken only by the distant hum of activity below and the squeak of the Ferris wheel's gears. Hannah hesitated, then spoke softly, as if the quiet made honesty unavoidable. "Sawyer and Shane deserve to know the truth about why you left, Luke. Eventually, they'll ask details. I don't want to lie to them, but I also don't want to poison them against you." Luke's chest tightened. The mention of explaining his past decisions to 2 innocent minds made him feel simultaneously ashamed and determined. "I'll tell them. Whatever you think is best, however much you feel they can handle at their age." He looked across at her, meeting her gaze. "I won't run from the consequences of what I did." Hannah swallowed, nodding slowly. "I appreciate that." A mechanical hum signaled the wheel's rotation again, carrying them slowly over the apex. The gondola dipped, giving a brief sense of weightlessness that made the kids squeal in delight. Hannah's hand shot out, gripping Luke's forearm instinctively. For a moment, their eyes locked. She seemed to realize what she'd done and started to withdraw, but his gentleness stopped her. "It's okay," he murmured. "I've got you." She released a shaky breath, letting her hand rest there for another heartbeat. Then she drew it away, cheeks flushed. I'm not afraid of heights," she said hurriedly, maybe trying to justify the contact. Luke's smile was rueful. "No shame in being cautious, especially after the day we've had." The Ferris wheel continued its slow revolution, giving them occasional glimpses of distant lightning. The children stared, entranced by the flickers that lit up the storm clouds. Eventually, Sawyer loosened his grip on Hannah, leaning forward slightly. "Mommy, look at all the people down there. They're so small." Luke followed his gaze. It was indeed a mesmerizing view, a panoramic snapshot of the fair in damp evening glow. Voices drifted up, echoes of laughter, announcements on loudspeakers, and the hum of generators. Shane pressed a hand to Luke's chest, trying to crane his neck further over the edge. Luke instinctively held the boy, securing him. "Easy, partner," he said softly. "We don't want you tipping this cart." Shane giggled. "I'm safe with you." Those 4 words nearly shattered Luke's composure. In a single statement, his son had bestowed a trust that Luke had not truly earned. Hannah caught Luke's expression, her face registering that same heart pinch of emotion. It was a moment he knew he would carry forever, a child's unguarded faith, given freely. When the wheel finally rolled them back to the loading platform, they stepped out onto the wet pavement. Hannah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she corralled the boys. Luke felt a trembling sense of gratitude. The day had begun in turmoil and discovery, and it was ending with a fragile sort of unity. Sawyer fiddled with the zipper of his jacket, glancing at Luke. "Is it time to go home now?" he asked, voice tinged with a reluctant acceptance that the fun might be over. Hannah nodded. "Yes, baby. It's been a long day. You need rest." Luke tried to hide the pang in his voice as he spoke. "Let me walk you to your car?" Hannah paused, then nodded. "That'd be nice." The group made their way through the diminishing crowd, many fairgoers deciding to call it a night after the earlier storm. They reached a gravel parking lot where a modest sedan waited, droplets sliding off its windshield under a feeble overhead lamp. Hannah popped the trunk, and the boys climbed in the back seat, yawning. Luke lingered by the driver's door, hands shoved in his pockets. He could feel Hannah's uncertainty radiating, the question of what happened next lingering in the humid air. "Listen," he said, voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. "I want to see you again, soon. I want us to figure things out. Not just in passing at a fair, but really talk. And, if you're open to it, I'd like them to see the ranch. Our ranch. Their ranch, if they want it to be." Her expression flickered with a million unspoken feelings. Hope, hesitation, fear, maybe even a cautious excitement. "We'll need time, but okay. They deserve to see where you live, where you work." Luke exhaled, relief and nerves colliding. "Thank you." He glanced toward the back seat where Sawyer and Shane were bickering about who got to hold the new lasso. A lump formed in his throat. "And thank you for raising 2 amazing kids, Hannah. I wish I could go back and change everything, but since I can't, I'll do my best going forward." She nodded, eyes swimming with conflicting emotions. "We'll see," she whispered, echoing words from earlier. He stepped back, tipping his hat in a gentle gesture. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and rolled down the window. "Luke," she called. He leaned in. "Yes?" Her gaze softened momentarily, the day's memories flashing behind her eyes. "I'm glad you were here." He swallowed. "Me too. Drive safe." With that, she pulled away, the car's headlights sweeping across the wet gravel before merging onto the dark country road. Luke stood there under the flickering lamp, watching until the red taillights faded into the distance. He felt the wind pick up again, carrying the last remnants of the storm's energy. In that moment, he was left alone, drenched and emotionally raw, but with a new sense of purpose blazing within him like a lantern in the night. He'd found his family, his sons, the woman he still loved, and was determined to prove himself worthy of them, no matter what trials the future held. Night settled over the Texas plains, leaving the fairgrounds in a patchwork of neon lights and lingering carnival music. Luke walked back through the damp walkways, barely noticing the lively crowds or the twinkling bulbs overhead. His heart was still fixated on the image of Hannah's sedan disappearing into the darkness with two little faces peering at him through the rear window. He caught sight of a familiar figure leaning against a wooden railing near the rodeo chutes. Clay, his foreman, looking bone-tired but relieved. Luke quickened his pace. "How's Diablo?" he asked, voice husky with concern. Clay tipped his hat, rubbing the back of his neck. "We got him stabilized at the clinic. Vet says it's touch and go, but she's optimistic. Seems like a mild intestinal twist. If all goes well, a couple of days of care and he'll be back on his feet. We had to pull him from the auction, obviously." Luke exhaled a heavy breath. "Thank God he's gonna be all right. I'd rather lose out on the sale than see him suffer." He paused, letting the silence fill with the rumble of distant generators. "And the rest of our cattle? How'd the auction go?" Clay mustered a half-smile. "We sold a few heifers. Bids were decent, especially given the storm. Not a knockout success, but we won't be hurting." Luke nodded, relief mingling with lingering tension in his chest. Money and reputation mattered. He had employees and ranch operations depending on him, but none of it felt as heavy now compared to the new and complicated responsibility he'd discovered at the fair. Clay caught the look in Luke's eyes, as if reading his thoughts. "So, you gonna tell me about what's got you so rattled, boss? You had a look in your eye earlier, like you'd seen a ghost." Luke hesitated, unsure how to sum up the day's life-altering revelations. Finally, he cleared his throat. I ran into Hannah." Clay's eyebrows rose. "Hannah? The one you dated way back, right when you inherited the ranch?" Luke swallowed. "That's the one." He paused, massaging his temples. "Turns out she had twins, Clay. My twins." The words still felt surreal on his tongue. "They're almost 6. She tried to tell me, but I never got the letters. Or I ignored them in the chaos, I don't know." Clay's eyes widened, then softened in sympathy. "Well, I'll be damned. Boss, that's big. You sure they're yours?" Luke gave him a withering look. "Clay, one glance told me they're mine. They've got my chin, for starters. One's a spitting image of me as a kid, the other's got Hannah's eyes. But there's no doubt. And I feel it, Clay. When I look at them, it's like looking at the life I missed." Clay leaned against a wooden post, arms crossed. "How'd she take it? You showing up, I mean." Luke shook his head. "She's hurt, angry, but she let me spend the day with them. We rode horses, watched them rope, saw the storm through together. It was—" He hesitated, voice tightening with emotion. "It was the best day of my life, and also the most overwhelming. I'm trying to figure out what comes next." Clay offered a solemn nod. "That's got to be rough. But you're Luke Caldwell. I've seen you wrangle half-wild stallions and navigate drought seasons that would break lesser men. If you put your mind to this, I reckon you can do right by 'em." "Thanks," Luke murmured, forcing a small smile. "I'm just worried. Hannah's no pushover. She's had to do everything alone for years. The boys, they trust her completely. I have to earn that." Clay lifted a shoulder. "Then you do. Day by day you prove it. Show up, Be honest and work like the devil to fix the mistakes." Luke stared at the night sky, where a few stars blinked through thinning clouds. His mind reeled with the reality of fatherhood: school schedules, doctor's visits, bedtime stories. He wanted it all, yet he hardly knew how to begin. A sharp metallic clang rang out from a nearby stall where a ranch hand closed a gate for the night. The rodeo area began to quiet, and the crowd thinned. Clay patted Luke's shoulder. "I'll finish up here, boss. You go home, get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." Luke nodded absently. "Yeah, thanks, Clay. I appreciate you handling Diablo. Tell the vet I'll swing by in the morning." He strode toward the parking lot, boots crunching through muddy gravel, his head a storm of thoughts. By the time he climbed into his truck, the fairgrounds behind him were draped in a hush. A lone carnival tune played weakly through the speakers, like the last sigh of the day's festivities. He slammed the door, letting silence envelop him. Rain slid down the windshield, shimmering under the overhead lights. As he turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbled, but he didn't shift into drive right away. Instead, he rested his forehead against the steering wheel, taking a moment to gather himself. His phone buzzed. Startled, he pulled it from his pocket, hoping for a message from Hannah. But the screen showed a missed call and a voicemail from a number he didn't recognize. With a flicker of curiosity, he tapped to listen. "Hey, Luke. It's, Dr. Maxwell from the large animal clinic. I know Clay's with Diablo, but there's a small concern about possible complications. You might want to come by in the morning for sure. That bull is important, and we want to keep you in the loop." Luke breathed a sigh of partial relief. It wasn't about Hannah or the twins, but Diablo's condition remained precarious, another responsibility pulling at him. Everything felt like it was happening at once. His ranch, his new role as a father, the tension with Hannah. Could he handle it all? No backing out now, he told himself firmly. He'd nearly lost Hannah once by thinking he couldn't juggle the ranch and a relationship. This time, he would find a way. He tucked the phone away, shifted into drive, and steered out onto the country road. Every pothole and slick patch in the asphalt reminded him of how the path ahead might be. Bumpy, uncertain, but navigable if he paid close attention. 30 minutes later, he pulled into the long driveway of Caldwell Ranch. Moonlight revealed a sprawling estate, white fences stretching into the darkness, lamps illuminating the porch of a large ranch house. Several smaller cabins, bunkhouses for ranch hands dotted the property beyond. It was a testament to generations of hard work, grown even larger by Luke's own ambitious drive. Yet for the first time, he wondered if all the acres and prize cattle truly mattered if he had no family to share them with. Once inside the house, Luke removed his wet boots, setting them carefully on a mat. The interior felt quiet, almost too quiet after the chaos of the fair. The living room's vaulted ceiling amplified every small noise, and the smell of leather furniture mingled with the faint aroma of coffee. On any other evening, Luke would collapse onto the couch, exhausted from ranch tasks. But tonight, something urged him to a different path. He walked down the hallway to a room he usually kept locked, his father's old study. Pushing the door open, he flicked on a lamp. Dust motes danced in the beam of light, revealing shelves lined with ranching manuals, ledgers dating back decades, and old family photo albums. He rarely visited this room. It held memories of his parents and a painful reminder of how suddenly he'd been thrust into responsibility. But now, it felt like a place he needed to face. He stepped to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a thick, leather-bound album. Flipping through its yellowed pages, he saw images of his father smiling with prized stallions, his mother standing in a pasture, an infant Luke cradled in her arms. His chest tightened. He'd grown up with loving parents, even if their time with him was cut short. He owed that same sense of belonging to Sawyer and Shane. One photo stood out. He was about 3, perched on his father's lap, both of them wearing matching cowboy hats. His father's broad grin, his mother standing behind them with gentle pride. A lump rose in Luke's throat. That was the kind of memory he wanted for his own sons. Safe, happy moments on the ranch, learning about life and responsibility in a caring environment. He set the album down, determination kindling in his chest. Everything he'd done since inheriting Caldwell Ranch had been driven by the need to honor his parents' legacy. Now, he would fight just as hard to earn Hannah's trust and be the father his twins deserved. Before bed, Luke shot a short text message to Hannah. He kept it simple. "Hope you and the boys got home safe. Thinking of you all. Thank you for today. Can't express how much it meant. Let's talk soon about next steps." He stared at his phone, half hoping for an immediate response. None came. Yet he felt oddly at peace, as though the wheels of fate had finally begun turning in the right direction. He moved to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee even though it was late. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, the remnants of the storm far off on the horizon. The night felt charged with possibility and uncertainty. Sipping the coffee, he looked out the window onto the moonlit expanse of pasture. A few horses grazed peacefully, silhouettes against the silver grass. Tomorrow, he murmured to himself. Tomorrow he would check on Diablo, handle ranch duties, and start planning how to invite Hannah and the twins for a visit, an opportunity to show them the ranch in all its rugged glory. He wanted them to feel at home here, to see not just the dusty chores and the massive responsibility, but the open skies, the sunrise rides, the sense of belonging to the land. He finished his coffee, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs to his bedroom. The bed felt massive and lonely, reminiscent of every night he'd spent alone, convinced that romance and family life weren't compatible with his ranching dream. With a final glance at his phone, still no reply from Hannah, he placed it on the nightstand and turned out the lamp. In the quiet darkness, he pictured Sawyer and Shane's small hands clutching the reins, their laughter at the petting zoo, the awe in their eyes on the Ferris wheel. Then he pictured Hannah, the determination behind her cautious smile, the flicker of old feelings that shone in her gaze when he'd offered his jacket. He felt the tug of longing for all they could have been, and all they still might be. Sleep finally came, bringing dreams of a ranch filled not only with cattle and prize bulls, but also the laughter of children and the warmth of a family united. Outside, a whip poor will called in the night, echoing across the fields, a hopeful lullaby for a man determined to mend the broken pieces of his past. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom curtains when Luke awoke, cutting through the shadows of lingering dreams. He blinked, bleary-eyed, and reached for his phone. It showed 7:03 a.m., and, to his disappointment, no new messages from Hannah. He pushed down the pang of worry. One day at a time, he reminded himself. Throwing on jeans and a well-worn button-down, Luke headed downstairs. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, courtesy of one of the ranch hands who always rose before dawn. Luke poured himself a cup, barely tasting it as he replayed the events of the previous day. The fair, the storm, the revelation of his sons, the fragile acceptance in Hannah's eyes. He grabbed his keys and stepped outside to the ranch's wraparound porch. The air felt crisp, still carrying a hint of coolness from last night's rain. Clay was already there, checking a clipboard. His dusty hat sat at a jaunty angle, and a hint of amusement curved his lips when he saw Luke emerge. "Morning, boss. Thought you'd sleep in a bit after all that excitement." Luke shook his head. "Not with Diablo in the clinic. I want to head over right away, see how he's doing." Clay handed him the clipboard. "That was my plan too. But since you're here, I'll let you handle it. Dr. Maxwell called. Said they'd probably run more tests this morning. They might need approval for further treatment." Luke scanned the scribbled notes. "Fine. I'll do whatever she recommends. Make sure you keep an eye on Tornado and the other stock. We'll have buyers still interested in our animals, even if we lost the big draw with Diablo." "Will do," Clay promised, tapping the brim of his hat. "By the way, about your..." other situation." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I know you're still figuring it out, but if you need anything, time off, help rearranging your schedule, I got your back." Gratitude swelled in Luke's chest. He clapped Clay on the shoulder. "Thanks, I appreciate that more than you know." Without further delay, Luke slid into his truck and drove off, gravel crunching under the tires. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pastures where cattle grazed lazily. Despite his restless night, Luke felt focused, determined. Diablo needed care, and Hannah, Sawyer, and Shane needed him to keep moving forward. There was no room for hesitation. He arrived at the animal clinic just outside the fairgrounds, a low building surrounded by paddocks. The sign out front read, "Large Animal Hospital, Dr. Maxwell, DVM." Luke parked under a shade tree and hurried inside, greeting the receptionist with a polite nod. She recognized him immediately. Caldwell Ranch had been here before, though not for anything as serious as Diablo's condition. "Dr. Maxwell is in the back," the receptionist said, leading him through a hallway lined with photographs of rescued horses and treated cattle. The smell of antiseptic and hay tickled Luke's nose. He found Dr. Maxwell in a spacious stall area where Diablo lay on a bed of clean straw. An IV line ran from a drip bag into the bull's neck, and the animal's eyes flickered open when Luke entered. "Morning, Doc. How's he doing?" Luke asked, carefully stepping closer. Dr. Maxwell glanced up, pulling her stethoscope away from Diablo's flank. "Better. He made it through the night without complications. We're going to do some imaging to make sure there's no lingering torsion in the intestines. As long as he stays calm, I'm hopeful for a full recovery." Luke exhaled relief. "That's good news. Whatever care he needs, we'll pay. No shortcuts." "I figured," she said, smiling. "I know how you feel about your animals, Luke." He crouched down, placing a gentle hand on Diablo's broad shoulder. The bull emitted a low, weary grunt. "Hey, buddy, just hang in there, okay? We'll get you home soon." Dr. Maxwell watched them, then added softly, "We'll keep him under observation another day or two. After that, he might need a few weeks of light recovery at the ranch. No stress or transport if it can be avoided." Luke nodded. "We'll do just that. Thanks, Doc." When he emerged from the clinic, the sun was higher, the day growing warmer. Luke checked his phone. Still no reply from Hannah. A swirl of frustration and longing pricked at him. She'd said she was open to talking, so maybe she just needed time. He debated texting again, but chose to wait. The last thing he wanted was to push her away by appearing desperate or overbearing. Instead, he climbed into his truck and thought about the ranch chores waiting for him. But a different idea sparked in his mind, one that might help bridge the gap with Hannah and show her he was serious about integrating into her life and the boys. He recalled something Sawyer and Shane had mentioned at the fair, their fascination with horses and their excitement over roping. Maybe if Luke could prepare the ranch to properly welcome them, it would be an invitation Hannah couldn't dismiss. He also needed to figure out if there was an easier way for her to visit than driving hours out of her way each time. Resolute, he drove back to Caldwell Ranch, formulating a plan. First, he'd talk with the ranch hands about rearranging some tasks and possibly setting up a kid-friendly corner. Then, he'd speak to his attorney about custody rights and parental responsibilities. It would be a delicate conversation. He wanted to do it right, ensuring he showed Hannah respect and gave her plenty of space. By midday, Luke was standing with Clay in the large barn, mapping out a potential safe spot for beginners to ride horses, away from the hustle and bustle of the working sections. "We can fence off an area here," Luke said, pointing to an open patch near the barn wall. "Just enough room for the boys to learn without spooking the other animals. We'll keep a gentle horse or pony in that stall for them." Clay eyed the spot, nodding. "Good call. I can fix up the fencing to keep it secure. But boss, if you're planning on them spending time out here, you'll need more than just a pony pen. Kids need places to run, explore, stay entertained." Luke's mind churned with ideas. We've got those old corrals on the east side that aren't used much. Could we turn part of it into a play area? Sure, with a little cleanup. And maybe add some seating for Hannah so she can relax and watch them. She might want to keep an eye on everything at first. Luke paused. The image of Hannah sitting with a soft smile while Sawyer and Shane raced around filled his mind. It felt so foreign and yet so perfect. Yes, let's do it. We'll need to clear the debris, maybe lay some grass seed or bring in a safe ground cover. I'll pay for whatever we need. Clay slapped Luke on the back. Consider it done. We'll make this place kid-friendly in no time. The rest of the day was spent juggling ranch work and planning. Whenever he had a spare moment, Luke pulled out his phone, half tempted to check if maybe the message app was glitching, but there was simply no new text from Hannah. By late afternoon, he called it quits on manual labor, needing to shower off dust and sweat. He retreated to the main house, footsteps echoing in the wide foyer. Clean and dressed in fresh clothes, Luke sat in his father's old study again, phone in hand. He was about to call Hannah, just to hear her voice, ask how Sawyer and Shane were doing, when a knock sounded at the door. Surprised, he set the phone down and answered. Outside stood a tall woman wearing a crisp shirt and a serious expression. Luke recognized her. Linda Armstrong, the local family law attorney who handled the occasional adoption or guardianship case in these parts. He'd met her briefly once at a charity event. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Caldwell, sorry to drop by unannounced. Might I come in?" Luke's gut twisted. Had Hannah already contacted a lawyer? Did she think he would try to force custody or something? Heart pounding, he stepped aside. "Of course, Ms. Armstrong. What can I do for you?" She entered, glancing around the old ranch house. "This is about Hannah Evans. I understand you two have reconnected, and there are children involved. Twins." Luke's hackles rose. "Yes, Sawyer and Shane, but I haven't even spoken to her about legal matters yet. We're trying to figure things out amicably." Linda Armstrong nodded, her expression softening a little. "I know. She hasn't hired me. Actually, I represent a paternal rights group, and a friend of hers reached out to me privately, worried that Hannah might need help. But I'm not here to stir trouble. I'm here to see if you need representation or clarification regarding your rights and obligations." Luke exhaled, tension coiling. "Obligations? You mean child support? Establishing paternity, all that?" She offered a professional smile. "Yes, exactly. This might be overwhelming for everyone. Sometimes it's best to clarify everything: custody, visitation, financial support, before misunderstandings lead to bigger conflicts." Luke thought about Hannah's exhausted eyes at the fair, how she'd struggled alone for years. He nodded slowly. "I want to do this right. I don't want to barge in and demand anything, but I do want to be recognized as their father, properly. I also want them to have everything they need, even if Hannah doesn't move out here." Linda set her briefcase on a small table in the study. "We can start with something called an acknowledgement of paternity. It's voluntary, but it officially establishes you as the father. Then there's custody discussions, full, joint, visitation schedules, etc. You two might not need a court battle if you can agree on terms." A wave of relief washed over Luke, tempered by apprehension. This was a world he knew little about. "I'm open to cooperating, but first, I need to talk to Hannah. She hasn't even told me where she stands, or if she wants help financially." The lawyer nodded sympathetically. "Understood. I just want you to know your options. We can keep this confidential unless you decide to file paperwork. The goal is to prevent ugly confrontations." Luke felt a headache forming. So many responsibilities: caring for the ranch, helping Diablo recover, winning back Hannah's trust, and now navigating legal parenthood. But beneath it all, a quiet certainty guided him. He would do whatever it took to legitimize his role and protect the twins' well-being. He escorted Linda out, thanking her for her time and promising to be in touch once he'd spoken with Hannah. As she drove away, he stared after her car, a knot in his stomach. He knew one thing: Hannah needed to be the first to hear of these legal options, not some third party. He refused to blindside her with a lawyer, not after all she'd endured. When the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Luke decided he couldn't wait any longer for Hannah's response. Standing out on the porch, he watched the day fade over the rolling pastures. A warm breeze carried the faint smell of hay and cattle, familiar and comforting. He dialed Hannah's number, breath catching when it rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, she answered, sounding tired. "Hello?" "Hannah," he breathed, relief flooding him. "Hey, it's Luke. Sorry to call out of the blue. I just wanted to hear how y'all are doing." A pause. "We're okay. The boys are asleep already. Yesterday wore them out. I've been busy with work too." He closed his eyes, visualizing her in some modest rental home, possibly folding laundry after an exhausting day. "I understand. Look, I'd like to see you, or at least talk about next steps, as we said. I've been working on some ideas to make the ranch more kid-friendly, if you'll come visit, that is." Another pause, this one longer. "Luke, I'm still sorting through my feelings. The twins are excited, but I told them you're busy with the ranch. We can't just drop everything and move or something. We need stability." "I'm not asking you to move right away," he assured her gently. "I just want you both to see what life could be like here. And if it's not the right path, at least we'll know. But give me a chance to show you I'm not the same man who pushed you away." She exhaled over the line. "I might manage a weekend trip soon, after I see if I can take time off, but I don't want to promise the boys anything until it's set in stone." Luke's heart lifted, though he kept his voice steady. "That's fair. Let me know which weekend works. Meanwhile, I'll keep tidying up the ranch, making sure it's safe and ready for them." "Okay," she said softly. The silence that followed felt charged with all the words unspoken, apologies, hopes, and lingering fears. Eventually, Hannah murmured, "I'm grateful you're trying, Luke. Really. But please remember, this isn't just about a quick fix. We have years of distance to mend." His throat tightened. "I know. One step at a time, like you said. I won't push harder than you're comfortable with." They exchanged subdued goodnights and hung up. Luke leaned against the porch railing, gazing at the star-speckled sky. He felt a flutter of anticipation. She was considering visiting the ranch, a crucial first step toward a future he could barely dare imagine. Ranch life was full of daily challenges, but none loomed as large as winning back Hannah's trust and forging a real relationship with Sawyer and Shane. Yet for the first time in years, Luke felt a glimmer of hope that the Caldwell Ranch might echo with a new kind of laughter. Children's laughter, the sound of a family united under its wide, welcoming roof. 2 weeks slipped by in a blur of ranch work, phone calls, and meticulously preparing for Hannah's potential visit. Each dawn brought Luke out to the barn, directing ranch hands on repairs and improvements that he hoped would make Caldwell Ranch more inviting for 2 young boys who'd never lived outside of town. He inspected every fence, replaced loose boards, and cleared debris from an old corral on the east side so Sawyer and Shane could safely roam without fear of spooking livestock. Each night, Luke collapsed into bed exhausted, only to rise with renewed determination the next morning, buoyed by the knowledge that Hannah was still considering a weekend trip. Clay and the other ranch hands caught glimpses of Luke's newfound energy. They teased him gently. "Boss, you sure got a fire lit under you," or "Never seen you so worked up over paint choices before," but supported him wholeheartedly. A sense of anticipation rippled through the ranch, as though the place itself sensed it might soon welcome a pair of children who had every right to call it home. Meanwhile, Luke kept in touch with Hannah via short, tentative text messages. Most days, she wrote only to confirm they were fine, and the kids were busy with school or daily routines. But one afternoon, her texts took on a flicker of warmth. "Sawyer's been asking if your horses have names. Shane wants to know if there are any calves he can feed. Luke grinned at his phone, heart lifting. He replied eagerly, "We have a sweet-tempered mare named Bella who loves kids. And yes, we've got a small herd of calves near the barn. Shane can help bottle feed if you're comfortable with that." Hannah responded with an emoji thumbs up, which was more encouragement than she'd shown in days. Diablo's health also improved. Under Dr. Maxwell's watchful care, the bull recovered from his intestinal twist, regaining his robust energy. Each time Luke visited the clinic, Diablo greeted him with a cranky snort, as though scolding him for missing the big auction. Once Dr. Maxwell cleared the animal to return home, Luke arranged for a gentle transport, refusing to risk the bull's condition with a bumpy ride. It was on a Thursday morning, just as Luke was discussing moving Diablo back to Caldwell Ranch, that Hannah called, her voice low and somewhat hesitant. "Luke, I was thinking, the boys don't have school next Monday. There's a teacher training day, so we could drive up for the weekend and stay through that extra day if that's okay. It's a few hours from us though, so I'd like to maybe get a motel or if your ranch has a spare room." She broke off, sounding uncertain. Luke's pulse leaped. "We've got plenty of spare rooms," he answered quickly, trying not to sound desperate. "But I know you may not feel comfortable staying under the same roof yet. We do have a separate guest cottage at the ranch. It's fully furnished, private, and close enough for us to visit easily. You're welcome to it." Hannah exhaled on the line. That might work. The kids would probably love the idea of being right there to see animals at sunrise. Her tone softened slightly, as though she was picturing it. "Are you sure it's not too much trouble?" "No trouble at all," Luke said, smiling. "I'll make sure the place is spotless. And Hannah, thank you for giving this a chance." She didn't respond for a moment, then spoke quietly. "I'm doing this for them, but I won't lie. I'm curious to see how you handle it, how they like ranch life. Guess we'll find out, right?" "We will. Drive safe when you come." The moment Luke hung up, he let out a whoop of excitement loud enough to echo through the barn rafters. Clay poked his head around the corner, eyebrows raised in amusement. "Good news, boss?" "You bet." Luke laughed, practically giddy. "They're coming this weekend." Clay grinned widely. "Then let's get that guest cottage in shape." He tilted his head, squinting at Luke. "But boss, you sure you're prepared for the questions and the potential fireworks?" Luke sobered, nodding. "I'm not naive. This weekend could make or break everything, but I'll face whatever comes." And so, preparations kicked into high gear. Luke and Clay spent hours airing out the cottage, which hadn't seen visitors in months. They replaced musty curtains, waxed the floors, and stocked the small kitchen with groceries. Luke even placed a small welcome basket on the dining table, fresh fruit, snacks for the boys, and a handwritten note of thanks for Hannah. Friday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze rolling over the plains. Luke barely slept the night before, nerves jangling like he was a teenager waiting for his prom date. He reminded himself that Hannah's trust couldn't be won with an immaculate cottage alone. It required emotional honesty and a willingness to let her see his vulnerabilities. He planned to show her how the ranch functioned in both its beauty and difficulty. No illusions. Around noon, a text came in from Hannah. "We're leaving soon. Probably arrive late afternoon. Traffic might be bad." Luke typed back, "No worries. I'll be here. Drive safe." He spent the next few hours tidying the front porch, organizing the tack room, and ensuring Bella the mare was brushed and ready for the kids. He couldn't recall the last time he was so anxious over a visit. Each rumble of a passing truck made his stomach flip, wondering if that was them. Finally, as the sun dipped lower, a modest sedan with out-of-state plates turned into the long gravel driveway. Dust kicked up behind the car as it approached the ranch house. Luke's heart thundered. He adjusted his hat, took a deep breath, and strode onto the porch, determined to greet them calmly. The sedan parked. For a moment, no one emerged, as though the occupants were mustering courage. Then Hannah stepped out, brushing hair from her face. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her eyes scanning the wide, open property. The twins hopped out next, Sawyer looking cautious and Shane bounding forward with that endless well of excitement. Luke descended the porch steps, giving them space. "Hey," he called softly, raising a hand. "Welcome to Caldwell Ranch." Hannah guided the boys forward. Sawyer clutched a small backpack, eyes darting to the grazing cattle. Shane's grin stretched ear to ear. Luke could almost see Hannah's nerves in the set of her shoulders. "It's huge," Shane breathed, spinning in a slow circle. "Look, Sawyer, cows everywhere." Sawyer tightened his grip on his backpack, glancing up at Hannah. She nodded encouragingly, so he inched closer to Luke. "Are those the calves you talked about?" Luke crouched slightly, smiling. "Some of them, yeah. We have more in a separate pasture for the younger ones. I'll show you tomorrow if you want." Hannah approached carefully, the corners of her mouth curling in a tentative smile. "So, where's this cottage you mentioned?" "Just over that way," Luke answered, pointing down a short gravel path behind a row of old oak trees. "We stocked it with food and fresh linens. Let me give you the keys." They walked as a group, the boys gawking at the horses peeking over fences. In the near distance, ranch hands quietly continued their tasks, though some offered friendly waves. Hannah's gaze kept drifting to the wide pastures and the big barn where Diablo, now home from the clinic, was resting in a stall. The ranch exuded a sense of work, pride, and grounded tradition. Luke hoped she saw it as more than just an intimidating sprawl of responsibility. Reaching the cottage, Luke unlocked the door. A faint smell of lemon cleaner wafted out. Inside, the small living area had rustic, comfortable furniture, a kitchenette, and 2 bedrooms down a short hallway. The decor was simple: earth-toned rugs, a few framed paintings of horses and landscapes. Hannah surveyed it with relief, nodding approval. "This is nicer than most motels," she admitted, setting her purse on a side table. "Thank you." Sawyer walked into one bedroom, gingerly testing the bed. Shane hopped into the other, exclaiming over the soft pillows. Hannah met Luke's eyes, her own filled with complicated gratitude. "This will be good. The boys will feel safe here." Luke dipped his head. "I'm glad. Take your time settling in. Whenever you're ready, I can show you around." She nodded. "Let me just unpack. We'll meet you outside." "Sure." He handed her the cottage key. "If you need anything, I'll be at the barn, finishing up chores. Clay's around too. Make yourselves at home." Hannah gave him a fleeting smile, a delicate gesture that hinted at walls slowly lowering. Luke backed out, carefully shutting the door behind him, heart pounding with the weight of what this weekend could mean. He headed toward the barn, checking on Bella and Diablo. As he brushed Bella's mane, he couldn't contain his thoughts. Hannah under his roof, Sawyer and Shane exploring the property, the possibility of forging a new life. A swirl of optimism and trepidation coursed through him, and he knew every move counted. If he pushed too hard, Hannah might retreat. If he seemed aloof, the boys might never feel welcome. By the time Hannah and the twins appeared near the barn, Luke had devised a simple plan for the evening. Show them a few animals, let the kids feed a friendly calf, and share a casual dinner on the ranch house porch if Hannah was up for it. Nothing too grand or staged. He wanted them to see the real day-to-day ranch life. "All settled?" he asked, noticing the comfortable fit of the cottage key in Hannah's jeans pocket. Sawyer clung to her side, while Shane clutched an empty plastic bottle. "Mostly," Hannah replied, glancing around. "The boys are eager to see those calves." Luke grinned. "Come on, let's not keep them waiting." He led them to the far corral, where a small group of orphaned or bottle-fed calves were kept. 2 of them, Brownie and Dusty, were especially friendly. Shane stepped right up, letting the calf named Dusty sniff his hand, bursting into excited giggles at the calf's warm, wet tongue. Sawyer hung back, uncertain, until Luke knelt beside him. "It's okay. Go slow. Let him smell you. You can pet his forehead." Sawyer mustered courage, extended his palm, and when the calf gently nudged him, a shy smile lit the boy's face. Hannah observed silently, arms crossed loosely, her expression reflecting wonder and caution. "This is everyday life here," Luke said quietly, glancing at her. "Taking care of animals, checking fences, dealing with births, helping the young ones. Hard work, but it has its rewards." She nodded, scanning the wide sky overhead. "I can see that. The boys are thrilled." Night approached, painting the horizon in pale lavender. Luke noticed the flicker of fatigue in Hannah's eyes, so he gently suggested returning to the ranch house for dinner. "I made chili, family recipe, if you're okay with a home-cooked meal." Hannah exhaled a small laugh. "I can't recall the last time I had chili that wasn't from a can." "Sure. Just let me know how I can help." He appreciated her willingness to engage. "You don't need to do anything. You're guests here. Come on!" They strolled back, Sawyer and Shane bounding ahead, their nerves replaced by excitement. On the porch, the table was already set, courtesy of Clay's discreet assistance. The kids clambered into seats, sniffing the air as Luke ladled steaming chili into bowls. He added cornbread on the side. "It smells so good," Shane declared, rocking back and forth. Sawyer, more reserved, nodded in agreement, eyes shining with anticipation. Hannah lingered, lips curving in a thoughtful smile. "Luke Caldwell, you can cook?" "Picked it up from my mama before she passed," he admitted softly. "She always said a rancher needs to know how to take care of himself and others." He placed a bowl in front of Hannah, their eyes locked, recalling the deep heartbreak that once separated them. Now, a fragile closeness existed in the hush of dusk, the warm glow of porch lights, and two hungry boys waiting impatiently to dig in. Luke raised his spoon, heart pounding. "Well, let's eat." They bowed their heads, not in a formal prayer but in a moment of collective silence. The weekend had only begun, but the first step felt right. The gentle hum of evening crickets surrounded them as they shared a simple meal, chili, cornbread, and the possibility of forging something real and lasting. In that moment, under the shadow of years lost, hope found a foothold. Dinner on the porch unfolded in a gentle warmth of camaraderie and cautious trust. The big ranch sky overhead transitioned from lavender to deep indigo, one star at a time winking to life. Luke poured glasses of iced tea, making sure to add extra sugar for the twins, then sat down to his own bowl of chili. The soft glow of the porch light illuminated each face, revealing the guarded but hopeful expressions that had slowly taken shape since their arrival. "Mom, this is so good," Shane announced between mouthfuls. "It's even better than the chili at the fair." Hannah suppressed a small laugh. "That's because fair chili usually sits in a pot all day," she teased gently. Then, turning to Luke, she added, "Really, it's delicious. Thank you." Luke felt a rush of warmth at her compliment. "Glad you like it. I don't get much practice cooking for anyone but myself, or maybe Clay when we have to eat in a pinch. Feels nice to share a meal again." Sawyer, who had been quietly focused on his food, raised his gaze toward Luke. "Are you going to eat with us every day if we stay here?" The question, spoken with innocent curiosity, snagged Luke's heart. He set down his spoon slowly. "If you decide to live here, yes, I'd eat with you as often as I could," he said, carefully picking his words so as not to pressure them. "Or even if you just visit sometimes, I'd love to have dinner with you." Sawyer seemed satisfied by that answer, though a glimmer of uncertainty remained in his eyes. Hannah cleared her throat. "We're not making any big decisions yet," she reminded softly. "Let's just enjoy this weekend and see how things go." Luke nodded, respecting her caution. He took a sip of iced tea, letting the conversation drift to lighter topics. Shane wanted to talk about all the animals he had glimpsed, from the chickens in a small coop behind the barn to the big quarter horses. Sawyer listened intently, occasionally chiming in with his own observations, which were more factual and measured. When they finished eating, Luke cleared the bowls and cornbread plates, insisting Hannah stay seated. "You're my guests," he repeated, stacking dishes with practiced efficiency. "I'll get these washed up. Maybe after that we can take a short walk to help the boys wind down?" Hannah hesitated, glancing at the twins. "We should probably get them to bed soon, but a little walk might be nice. They're wired from the drive." Sawyer and Shane grinned, obviously in favor of any excuse to stay up longer. Hannah smiled wryly. "All right, but let's keep it short." Luke moved the dishes into the kitchen just off the porch. Though the main ranch house was large, the kitchen was cozy and well used, with copper pots hanging from a rack and a small arrangement of wildflowers on the windowsill. He rinsed off the plates, heart quietly humming with the pleasure of having Hannah and the kids here, even if temporarily. Returning to the porch, he found Hannah gazing out into the darkened fields. The twins were squabbling over who got to hold the flashlight. Luke gently settled the dispute by handing them a second flashlight, a spare he kept on the porch. "All right, you two," he teased. "No shining it in each other's eyes. We'll just take a stroll along the fence line." Hannah stood, running a hand over her hair. "Ready whenever you are." She seemed calm, but Luke noticed the tension in her shoulders. She was still bracing for the unknown. They ventured into the night, the twins skipping ahead with beams of light dancing across the tall grass. Crickets sang in a constant chorus, and a faint breeze ruffled the trees. The ranch land stretched out into the darkness, only partially lit by a crescent moon overhead. Luke walked beside Hannah, leaving a small space between them. He pointed toward the glow of distant outbuildings. "That barn over there is where we keep our feed and some equipment. The stable you saw earlier is behind it. I put Bella there so she'll be ready if the boys want a ride tomorrow." Shane spun around, flashlight waving. "Yes, yes, yes," he cried. "I want to ride Bella again, Mom. She was so pretty." Sawyer slowed, shining his light on a fence post. "What about the calf corral from earlier? Can we see them tomorrow too?" Luke smiled at their enthusiasm. "Sure, we can bottle feed the younger calves. And if y'all are interested, we might fix up a small roping area. You liked roping at the fair, right?" Sawyer nodded, flashing a quick grin that reassured Luke the boy's initial wariness was easing. Hannah, overhearing, tucked her hands in her pockets. "Just remember, they're new to all this. Don't let them do anything too advanced." "Of course," Luke said softly. "Their safety comes first. Always." The twins chased each other a few yards ahead, flashlight beams crisscrossing in the dark. Luke and Hannah strolled more leisurely, boots crunching on the packed dirt. Frogs croaked from a nearby pond. She glanced at him sidelong, her voice hushed. "This ranch, it's bigger than I remembered. You've done a lot with it." Luke nodded. "When my parents passed, I threw myself into expansion projects. New fencing, extra grazing land, hiring good people. At first I thought it was about honoring them, but maybe I was also running from my own feelings, trying to be so busy I couldn't think about what I'd lost." Hannah's gaze flickered in empathy. "I get that," she said quietly. "After I left, I tried focusing on a steady job, raising the twins, never letting myself dwell on you or the ranch, but it was always there, in the back of my mind." They arrived at a wooden gate leading to a small paddock. The twins hopped around excitedly. Luke lifted the latch, guiding everyone inside. The paddock was empty at night, a good spot to wander without worrying about stepping into a full herd. Fireflies blinked among the grass as if putting on a secret show just for them. Shane gasped, trying to chase the glowing insects. "Look, Sawyer! Fireflies!" Sawyer looked on, curious but less frantic. Hannah smiled gently. "We don't see that many fireflies where we live now. Too many streetlights." Luke folded his arms, watching the kids dart after flickers of light. "I hope it's something they'll remember about this place, if they decide to keep coming." Hannah exhaled softly. "Luke, you keep hinting about them living here. Let's not rush. Yes, they're curious, but their whole life is in the city. I don't even know if moving to a ranch is feasible, or if we'd even want to." He turned to face her, moonlight illuminating the worry lines on her face. "I hear you. I'm not pushing for an immediate move. I can't help thinking about what it would be like, all of us together. It feels right." Silence stretched between them, heavy with lingering questions. Then Hannah spoke, voice trembling slightly. "I haven't forgiven you for leaving, not fully. But I see the man you've become. It confuses me. I spent years resenting the idea that you assumed I couldn't handle ranch life." Luke swallowed the lump in his throat. "You had every right to resent me. I was wrong. I thought I was protecting you from hardship, but I ended up abandoning you instead." Hannah blinked back what looked like tears. She turned toward the twins, who were still enthralled by the fireflies. "I'm doing this for them. They deserve to know their father. But if it doesn't work out, if we see that we can't blend our lives, then we'll leave. I won't put them through more heartbreak." A surge of determination rose in Luke's chest. "Then I'll do everything in my power to make sure this can work, even if it means making changes I never considered before. I'm not afraid of changing for them. Or for you." She glanced at him, raw emotion in her eyes, then gave a small nod, an acknowledgement that she'd heard him, even if she wasn't ready to embrace it fully. They both turned back to the boys, who had now tired of chasing fireflies and returned, shining flashlights on their parents. "We're sleepy," Shane announced, yawning theatrically. "Can we go back to the cottage now, Mom?" Sawyer stifled his own yawn. "Yeah, I'm tired too." Hannah nodded. "Sure, sweethearts. Let's go." She looked at Luke with a faint, tired smile. "Thanks for the walk. It's been a long day." He latched the gate behind them, and they retraced their steps to the main yard. On the porch, Luke paused. "I'll walk you back to the cottage, if that's okay." Hannah hesitated, then agreed. The twins trotted along, shoulders drooping from the day's excitement. When they reached the cottage door, Luke gently ruffled Shane's hair and patted Sawyer's shoulder. "Good night, fellas. Glad you're here." Shane grinned. "Me too. Tomorrow I want to feed the calves first thing." Sawyer offered a small wave. "Night." Hannah ushered them inside, then paused, turning back to Luke. "Thanks for dinner and everything. We'll see how tomorrow goes." Luke gave a soft smile. "Yes, tomorrow. Sleep well, Hannah." She slipped into the cottage, quietly shutting the door. Luke stood in the glow of the porch light for a moment, hearing the faint murmur of motherly instructions, Hannah telling them to brush their teeth, get into pajamas. The normalcy of it stirred a deep ache and longing in his chest. Eventually, he headed back toward the main house under a canopy of stars. Each step felt weighty with the knowledge that a single weekend might not be enough to conquer the hurt he'd caused or the years that had slipped away. But something in Hannah's eyes tonight, her gentle acceptance at dinner, her fragile willingness to let the boys explore ranch life, told him he had a fighting chance. Inside his own home, he gazed at the silent rooms. Although exhaustion tugged at him, he busied himself with small chores, like straightening cushions on the couch or wiping the kitchen counters. He couldn't seem to rest, thoughts churning about how to impress upon Hannah that he was ready for fatherhood and partnership, not just a fleeting moment of redemption. At last, Luke climbed the stairs to his bedroom, phone in hand. No new messages. He set it down gently, changed into comfortable clothes, and crawled into bed. Tomorrow he'd start with coffee and breakfast, then introduce the twins to a day of real ranch chores, bottle-feeding calves, grooming Bella, maybe even a short ride through the pasture if they were ready. As he drifted off, the last image in his mind was Hannah's guarded smile under the moonlight and Sawyer and Shane's laughter at the sight of dancing fireflies. In that fleeting vision, the ranch no longer seemed empty. Its wide fields and sturdy barns resonated with the promise of a family finding its way. Luke awoke at dawn to the faint glow of pink and gold staining the eastern sky. He rushed through his routine, pulling on jeans, washing his face, and quietly making coffee before slipping out onto the porch to watch the sunrise. Every moment felt charged with possibility. Today was the real test. Hannah, Sawyer, and Shane would experience a full morning in ranch life. It was his chance to prove that neither he nor Caldwell Ranch was too daunting for a family. As the sun crested, painting the fields with pale light, he heard a door creak open down the path. The cottage. Moments later, small figures appeared. The twins, bounding toward him with childlike energy, Hannah trailing behind with a tired but amused look. Luke set his coffee mug on the porch rail and waved them over. "Morning," he called, smiling at the sight of the boys in boots and jackets clearly bought for the trip. "You're up early." Sawyer rubbed sleepy eyes. "Mom said we could come see how you feed the animals." Shane clutched a small plastic bucket. "I'm ready." Hannah joined them, arms folded against the cool breeze. The boys woke up at the crack of dawn, begging to come out. "Hope that's okay." Luke grinned, heart warming. That's ranch life. Early mornings are half the fun. He offered them a quick breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon in the ranch house kitchen. The twins, wide-eyed at the open expanse of Luke's home, quickly wolfed down the food. Hannah lingered in the doorway, politely nibbling. She observed every detail: the family photos on the walls, the jars of dried herbs, the evidence of a solitary man slowly preparing space for something more. Once the plates were cleared, Luke announced the plan. "First, we'll bottle feed the calves. Then we can groom Bella so she's ready if you want to ride. And after that, we'll do a little exploring. How's that sound?" The boys cheered in unison. Hannah arched an eyebrow. "All right, but keep it slow. Baby steps." Luke nodded his promise. Baby steps. They trudged out to the calf corral, sunlight brightening the dew on the grass. Clay was there, already prepping bottles of milk replacer. He tipped his hat at the visitors. "Mornin', Miss Hannah. Mornin', fellas. You ready to meet some hungry babies?" Shane jumped up and down. "Yes!" Sawyer nodded more sedately, but Luke sensed his excitement in the boy's restless gaze. Clay handed each twin a warm bottle, demonstrating how to brace it so the calves could latch on. Luke watched closely, making sure they understood. Calves were stronger than they looked, and one headbutt could send a child tumbling. But the two young ones, Brownie and Dusty, recognized bottle time instantly and trotted over to feed. Sawyer let out a quiet gasp when Brownie's tiny muzzle pressed against the bottle. Shane giggled as Dusty slurped noisily, almost toppling the bottle from his hands. Hannah stood by, a hint of maternal anxiety etched on her features, but also a blossoming pride. She caught Luke's eye and offered him the faintest of smiles, a wordless acknowledgement of this moment's sweetness. When the calves were satisfied, Clay led them back to the larger pen, leaving the family free to visit Bella. The mare awaited them patiently in the stable, big dark eyes flicking between the newcomers. Luke grabbed a soft brush, demonstrating how to move it gently along Bella's coat. The twins took turns, each giggling when Bella flicked her ears or gently nuzzled them. "You boys want a short ride again?" Luke asked once Bella was brushed and saddled. He studied Hannah's expression for permission, wanting to reassure her. She paused, inhaling. "Just a calm walk, okay? No galloping or anything fancy." Luke gave a nod, adjusting the stirrups. "Absolutely. I'll lead Bella myself." He motioned Shane forward first. The boy clambered into the saddle with Luke's help, eyes shining. Luke led Bella in slow circles around the stable yard, hand firmly on the reins, while Hannah and Sawyer watched. When Shane's turn finished, Sawyer stepped up. "I want to try it by myself," he said quietly, a note of determination undercut by a flicker of nerves. Luke glanced at Hannah for confirmation. She exhaled, steadying herself, then nodded. "If Luke thinks it's okay." "We'll keep it at a walk," Luke assured them. He lifted Sawyer into the saddle. The boy held the reins carefully, knuckles white at first, but as Bella stepped forward, he relaxed. Luke still maintained a guiding hold, but gave Sawyer just enough slack to feel a bit of independence. Sawyer managed a slow lap around the enclosure, eventually flashing a proud grin. Hannah's lips parted, stunned that her quiet son had displayed such confidence. "You're doing great," she called, voice thick with emotion. Luke felt a surge of affection for all of them. He guided Bella back, helping Sawyer dismount. "Nice job, bud," he praised gently, ruffling the boy's hair. Sawyer's smile lingered, more open than Luke had ever seen. Shane broke into applause. Hannah's eyes glistened, though she quickly turned away, blinking hard. Luke placed a soothing hand on Bella's neck, letting the family absorb the moment. After returning Bella to her stall, Hannah cleared her throat. "That was wonderful. Thanks. They're going to talk about this for weeks." Sawyer and Shane verified her statement by excitedly recounting every second of their rides. Luke let them chatter while he and Hannah exchanged a meaningful glance. Her guard was still up, but the lines of tension in her face had softened, replaced by a hesitant joy. They strolled back to the cottage area, the boys skipping in front, bursting with excitement about future rides. Luke slowed his pace, drawing level with Hannah. He spoke quietly, not wanting the twins to overhear. "How are you doing? Really?" She considered, gaze sliding over the ranch's wide expanse. "It's a lot. I won't lie, this place is impressive, and I can see how the boys love it. But I still carry the memory of how I felt when you sent me away." His chest constricted at her words, the old guilt flaring up anew. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I wish I could erase that hurt. But I can't. All I can do is be here now, showing you I've changed." Her eyes flicked to the twins, bounding around a patch of wildflowers. "Part of me wants to let go of the anger. I see how happy they are, but I can't just forget. It'll take time." He nodded. "I'll give you that time. And if living here doesn't feel right, I'll do whatever's necessary to stay close. Rent a place in the city part of the week, anything." She halted, surprise flashing in her expression. "You'd do that?" "Absolutely. They're my sons. And you—" He swallowed, forcing honesty. "I never stopped loving you, Hannah, even when I was too stubborn and scared to admit it. I won't lose you again." She let out a shaky breath. "Luke." Her voice wavered on the cusp of deeper emotion, but just then, Shane called from a few yards away. "Mom! Sawyer found a bug with bright colors. Come see." Hannah's face shifted, maternal duty reasserting itself. She pressed her lips together. "Let's talk later." She moved away, heading to the twins. Luke lingered, exhaling a mix of hope and frustration, but he reminded himself, baby steps. Nothing was solved overnight. The rest of the morning passed with small joys, collecting eggs from the chicken coop, walking along a tranquil pond where dragonflies skimmed the surface. Luke introduced them to a gentle old hound who guarded the barn. The twins tentatively petted its ears. Hannah watched every interaction with keen eyes, her posture gradually loosening as she saw Luke's quiet competence and care for his animals. By lunchtime, the children were dusty and hungry. Luke proposed a simple picnic near the old oak grove. "We can spread a blanket, let the boys run around. I'll bring sandwiches." Hannah hesitated. "We could eat in the cottage. No need for all the fuss." "Trust me," Luke said softly. "It's no fuss. The weather's perfect, and the oak grove is beautiful this time of day. I'd like to do something special." She relented, so Luke prepared sandwiches, fruit, and bottles of cold water, loading them into a basket. The four ambled across a gentle slope to a cluster of towering oak trees whose branches spread like a protective canopy. Dappled sunlight danced on the grass. Sawyer and Shane instantly began exploring the area around the trees. They discovered an abandoned bird's nest, stared at a row of anthills, then started racing each other in circles. Hannah sat on the blanket, legs folded beneath her, still cautious but content in the moment. Luke placed the basket beside her and settled down, carefully maintaining a slight distance so as not to crowd her. For a few minutes they ate in near silence, the only sounds being the kids' laughter and a distant cattle low from the pasture. Luke found himself mesmerized by the way the sun caught the golden strands in Hannah's hair, how the gentle breeze molded her blouse against her figure. The old ache of longing, tempered by reverence, stirred in him. He cleared his throat. "I know it might be too soon, but I asked a lawyer about my rights. Not because I'm coming after you for custody or anything. I just wanted to be sure I do this properly. I want to help with child support, schooling, whatever they need." Hannah looked down, a flicker of uncertainty on her face. "I figured you'd get around to that. I appreciate you being upfront." She let out a soft sigh. "I don't want a legal fight. We've had enough battles these past years, even if they were mostly fought in our own minds." He nodded. "Right. The lawyer said we can do an acknowledgement of paternity voluntarily, set up a plan together. That's all I want. Cooperation. I won't spring any surprises on you." She reached for a grape from the basket, rolling it between her fingers. "Let me think about it, okay? It's a big step, making it official. Sawyer and Shane might not fully understand now, but it matters for their future." Luke murmured, "Take all the time you need." They fell quiet again, the tension of unresolved issues lingering, but not overshadowing the calmness of the day. The twins returned, breathless from running. Luke handed them sandwiches, smiling at how they devoured them with the unreserved appetite of growing children. After the meal, they all lay on the blanket for a bit, staring through the canopy of leaves. Shane made shapes out of the clouds, insisting one looked like a galloping horse. Sawyer disagreed, claiming it was more like a dog chasing a squirrel, which led to an amused debate. Hannah and Luke exchanged an almost conspiratorial grin as they listened to the boys' banter. As the afternoon grew warmer, the twins dozed off, lulled by the soft rustle of leaves and the comfort of a full belly. Hannah gently brushed a strand of hair from Sawyer's forehead, gazing at her children with tenderness. Luke found himself longing to reach out, to lay a reassuring hand on her arm, to promise that he'd be there for all of them. But he held back, sensing she wasn't ready for that level of closeness. Finally, Hannah glanced at him. "They're so happy here," she whispered, voice tinged with both joy and trepidation. "I can't deny how they're thriving even in these 2 days." Luke let out a slow breath. "That's all I've ever wanted, for them to feel safe and free, to have a life full of possibilities." A hint of tears shone in Hannah's eyes. "I still don't know how this fits with my job, their school, our routines. We'd have to find a new balance. It's terrifying to uproot everything again." He gently nodded. "I understand. Whatever decision you make, I'll support it, even if that means me traveling to see them or us finding a halfway point. I just hope you'll keep an open mind about the ranch. About me." She met his gaze, the vulnerability there so tangible it made his heart clench. "I'm trying," she admitted, voice quivering. "I'm really trying, Luke." Moved by her honesty, he spoke softly. "I see that. Thank you." They didn't break eye contact for a long moment, the silent acknowledgement of a second chance glowing between them. Eventually the twins stirred, rousing from their naps. Hannah gently ushered them up, brushing grass from their clothes. With the children yawning, they decided to stroll back toward the cottage. Daylight was fading once again, the ranch's shadows lengthening across the fields. The promise of another evening meal together lingered in the air, along with the possibility of forging deeper connections. As they neared the cottage porch, Sawyer tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, can we stay longer than Monday? We haven't even seen all the animals yet." Shane brightened at the idea. "Yeah, we can stay, right? At least a few more days?" Hannah inhaled, torn between practicality and their obvious happiness. She looked from the twins' pleading faces to Luke's quiet, hopeful stance. Then she touched Sawyer's hair gently. "We'll talk about it, sweetheart. Luke could almost hear his own heartbeat. He didn't want to push, but he couldn't deny how his pulse pounded at the notion of them extending the visit. Hannah's gaze flicked to Luke. "One more day," she said, voice measured yet warm. "We can stay through Tuesday, maybe. I'll call my boss and see if I can rearrange some things." The twins erupted in cheers, hugging each other like they'd won a grand prize. Luke's chest flooded with gratitude. He locked eyes with Hannah, silently conveying how much this meant to him. For the first time in ages, the ranch no longer felt like an empty fortress. With each step Hannah and the children took toward trusting him, Luke discovered new corners of his own heart, a capacity for warmth and fatherly devotion that he'd once locked away. Outside, the fading sun draped Caldwell Ranch in a honeyed glow, as though blessing their tentative steps toward a shared future. And so, they closed another day hand in hand with hope and uncertainty. The road to healing remained winding, but as Sawyer and Shane laughed with each other and Hannah's guarded smile flickered in the twilight, Luke believed with unwavering resolve that the family he'd once lost might truly be within reach, this time to hold on to forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.